and welcome to the 16th Annual Golden Apple Award. I want to thank you all for coming. This award is given to professors within the university. However, it is maintained by the participation of students and members of the community. So I'd like to thank you all for helping to continue with this award. Without further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome Athletic Director Bill Martin.
Well, good evening, and aren't I a weird choice to come down here tonight? So why in the world are they inviting me to this such prestigious event where we celebrate, the fundamental mission of Michigan, that being teaching? Thought, well, maybe it's because they knew I had an undergraduate degree in English, and I can talk about T.S. Eliot and The Wasteland, or E.E. Cummings, or Ferengeti, or any of those guys, but trust me, I can. Fortunately, in life, I didn't follow that course, though. I pursued another one, and I'm most pleased with it, and I'm honored to be serving this institution now, just completing my 6th year as athletic director. Again, another surprise appointment that I did not expect. I've been asked to say a few things on behalf of the institution, the academy, and the significance of this event in the life of Michigan and our students. As you all know, this was a student initiative. It's been around for 16 years. I mentioned just briefly to one of my colleagues who has been at Michigan for some 35 years, when I said that Professor Rabkin won this, was nominated for this award and won it on an online vote by the students, he said, let me tell you, real simply, Eric's a great guy and the kids got it right. Eric's a great guy and the kids got it right. I mean, I'd like that on my tombstone. Well, then as I was perusing the comments of students on the web, I was struck by one who took your course, Eric, in fantasy. And he said, fun class, I definitely recommend it. Don't get on his bad side or he'll make you feel like an idiot. Engaging lectures, though, weird grading scale, kind of hard to get an A. So maybe this evening, Eric, you can explain what that's all about. I was also truly interested to see all the monetary rewards you get from this. I see that there's hard cash that changes hands, and I trust you remember to report that to Uncle Sam before April 15th. I see that you get your name on a plaque in the union. Is that kind of like perpetual tenure or something? I really can't understand that, but that's really kind of nice. And I guess as we talk this noon, they give you something that's got a little golden apple on it, but I thought in honor of the fact that here you've invited somebody from down at the bottom of the hill, the academic or the athletic department, to participate tonight. What could I do, what could we do to recognize Eric for his 30 years of service in teaching our kids? And what I have, and I'm going to show you, but it's up to you whether he can pick it up and take it, by whether you stand up at the end of his lecture and give him a standing ovation. But Eric, don't touch, but what I have for you in a South Main Market bag that I stole from my wife is a golden football. I had it autographed by Lloyd Carr, but to make certain you didn't just sell it on eBay, I put my name on it too, so it'd be totally devalued. Eric, congratulations and go blue.
Hard to believe, 16 years. That used to sound like a long time. I will confess, I'm often credited with the idea of having this award. I'm not sure that there are any original ideas in the world. I'm not sure I've ever actually had one. Some of you, Eric certainly knows the classic story about the book review, academic book review, that said there's much in this book that is good and original. Unfortunately, the part that is good is not original, and the part that is original is not good. But so originality, like so many other things, is, I think, highly overrated. This lecture really was inspired by several people. One, and you have it in your program, one of the great teachers of the Jewish tradition, rabbi by the name of Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, who himself professed in the pages of the Talmud 1,800 years ago that you should get our lives together one day before we die. And of course, since we don't know when that is, we should be preparing every year. It's a lecture that's had a wonderful track record on this campus. It's got a great history. In fact, it is part now of the culture of the university. And please God, in 20 years, nobody will remember my name. They'll just think that the Golden Apple Award had been here forever. The first recipient, some of you are old enough to remember, was Drew Weston. He was actually denied tenure about 2 weeks before the lecture. It almost was his last lecture at the University of Michigan. He went off to Harvard, which is where professors go when they can't cut it at Michigan, apparently. Part of the inspiration here also was a student I read about some years ago, a student at Columbia, which is where I guess presidents of the university go when they can't cut it at Michigan. This was the student who sued the university. He was a student at Columbia, and his senior year, he stopped paying tuition. He believed, and he in fact made this case, that the university had been a breach of contract. They had promised him wisdom, and all he had to show for his 3.5 years were several boxes of lecture notes. The university did what universities do. They sued him. They took him to court, and they had a stronger legal team than he did. He was representing himself. And he went to court, and he made this case, and the university attorney said there was no promise expressed or implied about wisdom. And he said, well, if wisdom isn't in the curriculum, why is it proclaimed on the front of every building in Morningside Heights? Sapientia, Sophia. He said, take the signs down if you're not delivering on this. I'm sorry to say that he lost. One of the inspirations for this, actually there were 2 or 3 people I had in mind when we first started this lecture. One of them was Eric Rabkin. When I was thinking, who would give this kind of lecture? I mean, I thought of Ralph Williams, who could not think of Ralph Williams. But I thought of Eric Rabkin, and not just because Eric has been one of my very best friends for some decades now. And it's good that you're here tonight, because some of you know that Eric and I have this understanding that we have agreed to speak at each other's funerals. I think I asked first, Eric, so I think you're going to have to live a day longer than I do, but I have been telling people, if you don't take a class with Eric Rabkin, you're going to have to wait till my funeral to hear him speak. And I'm still dying to know what you're going to say. I have no idea. This is going to be, it's going to be wonderful. He has just about the fastest mind of anyone I've ever known. Just a little foretaste of the DVD that I trust you're all going to buy. There's a Greek Week event at Hill, apparently. Those folks are going to have to spend $18 to see what happened here tonight, and you can eat their hearts out. But on the DVD, you will see the little clip of when Eric was presented with the award in class. And Lauren Schiff, one of the wonderful students on the Shout Committee, presented it to him. I won't embarrass you too much, Lauren, but it was a great moment. You'll never forget it. And she said, Professor Rabkin, we're just thrilled on behalf of the Golden Apple Shout Committee to inform you that you've been nominated to receive the 2006 Golden Apple Award. And like that, Eric said, wait a minute, I'm a professor of English. Was I nominated or did I get the award? He can be sometimes intimidating because he's so smart, but I'm going to leave the rest of that to other people. I will simply to say that, Eric, every time in my life I have come to you for advice, which is often, and I have said, Eric, I'm about to take step A, and you have told me instantly where I would be at step M and what I'd be standing in, and I've always been grateful for knowing that. This award is now going on the road. Hillel has partnered with the University Alumni Association. We've taken Ralph Williams, God bless him, already to New York, Chicago, and DC, and we're going to Los Angeles in a couple of months. And the reason we're doing this is because we want people to understand, after they leave, we want all of you, especially the students, to understand while you're here what the words alma mater mean. It means a nurturing mother. Yeah? I mean, it's a breast. I mean, it's your mom who is there for you at these critical years of your life, and even if you never go home again. On Mother's Day, you spend $60 on flowers. That's your Alumni Association dues, okay? It's not a place that gives you discounts on car rentals, and it's certainly not a place that gives you 4 years' worth of lecture notes. It's this incredible formative experience, and while you're here, think about that. Think about what it's going to mean someday to think of this place as your alma mater, as the mother that nurtured you. And someday, think about this lecture that you're going to hear tonight. Years from now, wherever you are, close your eyes for just a moment and think about the lecture, the incredible lecture you're going to hear tonight, and I promise you that at that moment you will again be back in Ann Arbor. You'll be back at the University of Michigan. You'll be back home. And you'll have the memory of someone who could hardly be a better representative of the mom this place is and is supposed to be.
Good evening. I'm Carl Simon, professor of mathematics and economics and public policy, director of the Center for Complex Systems, and I hope a good friend and colleague of my friend Eric Rabkin. I'll skip the details in this introduction of Eric's his background, his life. It's well done in the program and it's an incredible website if you haven't seen it. I won't tell you that he was born in Queens 60 years and 2 weeks ago today, in fact. He came to English department in 1970. He's written 150 publications, 30 books, including one that came out just recently on Mars. I want to focus on Eric the teacher, since that's what today is celebrating. You know, teaching in some sense is about teaching in some sense, hopefully it'll work out before you're up here, is about what? Conveying information from someone knows a little to some people who know even less. Hopefully with some excitement and success. And Eric is sort of the paradigm of both conveying excitement in a successful way. But he's much more than a conveyor of information. I've been lucky enough to see Eric in many different behind-the-scenes scenarios, and I want to talk about that just a little bit in the 2 hours that I've been allotted. Sort of to show you what makes Eric tick. He's much more than, he is an English professor extraordinaire, the Thoreau professor of English. Thoreau, sorry. He's the leader of the University of Michigan Information Technology Group, certainly a leader. He cares about conveying information and has made that his life. He's the author of, as I mentioned, a recent book on Mars, and he's the most active humanities prof in our very scientifically oriented Center for the Study of Complex Systems. And this is how I got to know Eric. It was maybe 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, at a scientific meeting, workshop on complex systems. There were a whole bunch of esoteric papers that I didn't understand, but I'll bet Eric did. And Eric came up to me afterwards and says, I have this idea that's been gnawing at me, and I'd like to run it by you to see if it makes sense. He said, I have an idea for integrating literary studies and science. Right, Eric. Talk to me another winter. Well, he persisted and helped generate what has become sort of a study of the biological evolution of literary genre. Took a while for his persistence to wear me down, but his idea was the following. What if we codified the stories, for example, in a literary genre? So think of them as DNA strings. And then take these strings and watch how they evolve over time. What an incredibly creative idea. And, so the genre we decided to focus on was the genre that Eric knows so well, American short story science fiction, where there was a clear notion of fitness, namely how successful stories were in getting reprinted. And Eric said that this would be a wonderful opportunity to have students and faculty involved in not just a process of learning, but a process of research, of pushing the boundaries. I said, well, great idea. Let's start let's go build a coding mechanism. Eric said, wait a minute, this is a collaboration. We're not going to build a coding system. The students are going to start from scratch. They're going to build a coding system. In January 1988, 17 semesters ago, we started with I think, Eric showing incredible trust and guidance. The students did build this coding system. In science terms, sort of a coordinate system in which to look at the elements of the genre. I kept calling it a class. Eric, who is in fact much, so completely attuned with students, always corrected me and says, Carl, it's not a class, it's our collaborative. We have over time had papers, student presentations. There's one this weekend. Lots of individual guidance, 0 teaching credit, probably well over 200 students. So it's this thorough involvement in bringing the excitement of learning and of research and the learning process to his students, and I think makes Eric such a successful and dynamic educator. He crosses the disciplines. He has a keen eye for students' interests and involvements. So you're celebrating his great lectures, but Eric is much more than a great lecturer. He's the thorough, complete educator, and it's my honor to ask him to step up and give that last famous lecture.
I would feel, I do have a pen behind my ear. I always have a pen behind my ear because you never know when something is going to need to be written down. I'm supposed to wear this too, right? So here we go again. I'm sorry for holding this up, folks. Vamos a ver. I would feel incredibly humble if I didn't feel entirely oppressed by the weight of expectation that's been created. I thank you all. I thank the students, the ones who are here tonight, the ones who have been rewarding me constantly for 36 years since I got to the University of Michigan. I feel incredibly fortunate. I thank you all for coming out here. I know that I'm not a sexy sorority girl dancing my way into the hearts of millions, which is what's going on right at Hill right now. So for those of you who share my bad taste, thank you for being here. Eric Rabkin is going to give his ideal last lecture. Well, I don't know about that. Let's see if we've got this right. No, we've got this wrong. I need us all to be able to see it. Yes, I can see it and you can see it. So someone from the Daily asked me, is it true that you're not willing to talk about the content of your lecture in advance? And I said, it is true, but that's not what I told people. What I said is I wasn't going to give them the title of my lecture in advance, but you can't have the content either. Here's the title, and now that you have the title, cobwebs and cobwebs and words, oh my, you don't have the content either, which is just my little way of creating a bit of suspense. I really do want to thank you all so much. My friend Brian Coppola, who is also fortunate to have been named a Golden Apple winner, wrote me a letter of congratulations after I had been named this year's recipient, and I wrote back, and this is about a week after it happened, I wrote back to Brian and I said, tell me, when does the smiling stop? And he said, I'll let you know when I find out. I have a feeling I'm not going to find out any more than Brian has. So this probably isn't my last lecture, but I do understand the attraction of a roadside accident. And you know, if you've misunderstood and thought, ideally, this is his last lecture, I want you to know that probably that's not the case. And I probably will be lecturing again, maybe even within 24 hours. I hope that that doesn't disappoint too many of you. The question then becomes, well, what do we mean by a last lecture? And Michael, of course, talked about that to some extent. The idea that the lastness here isn't that it will in fact be one's last, but there's a fiction about it being one's last. I thought, you know, I thought about this when I gave my science fiction lecture yesterday afternoon. I thought, maybe I'll pull a Socrates, you know? And then I thought, but if I live, what'll I say on Thursday? You know, so there is this problem that one has to deal with. In fact, the idea of focusing on death so as to make life better is an old one. This is a 16th century etching that really represents an idea that was important from the Middle Ages forward, the monastic idea, this rag of death which thou shalt see, consider it, and pious be. And, you know, pious is good, but overeating is good too sometimes. You know, so the problem is not simply can we focus on death, but when should we think about lastness, and when should we think about the middle-term goals? When should we think about the short-term goals? Yes, you know, right now I've got to murder that son of a bitch, but on the other hand, Yorick, you're not looking too good, you know? So that's what Hamlet is concerned with there. It's a memento mori. If I die now, will I be sending him to heaven and me to hell? Which was just an excuse not to actually off the son of a bitch. Samuel Johnson said, "Depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully." And I suppose that's true. This, by the way, is a picture from an actual hanging in Tombstone in the beginning of the 20th century when they still did things in public instead of making video games out of them and saying they weren't doing it. Sorry, this was not supposed to be a political discussion. This particular saying, which is well known these days, probably most of you are not aware, but I kind of like it. I like it not because I actually know what it's going to be like to have 2 weeks to contemplate my death by hanging, since my guess is that's not how it's going to happen. You know, I may know, but it's not going to be by hanging. What I like about it is that Samuel Johnson, as many of you will know, is credited with having single-handedly created the first truly modern dictionary of the English language. And he would know that the word depend means to hang. Things are dependent upon each other. This is gallows humor. Oh, that little scamp, Johnson. He's making a little story here. The thing is that words have diverse meanings, and they need to have diverse meanings. How do words work? Well, I'd like to suggest that, at least in a technical term, ambiguity in street language, you know, ambiguity means vagueness, but in technical terms, ambiguity refers to utterances which have more than one possible meaning as defined by the extant structure. So, flying planes can be dangerous is an ambiguous sentence. It either means, crap, there's flying planes, or be careful when you're flying planes, right? Flying planes can be dangerous is ambiguous. I'd like to say that in some sense, natural language, as opposed to code or computer languages, natural language requires ambiguity. When a parent says to a child, "I love you," and the child says to the parent, "I love you too," they can't possibly be meaning the same thing about what they will do for each other in the future, about what they do mean something of the same thing. They mean, at the very least, I want to exchange this verbal token with you and reinforce whatever is my inexpressible relationship with you that matters so much. That becomes possible because of the inherent necessary ambiguity of language. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful golden-haired princess. And the convention of beginning, once upon a time, there was a beautiful golden-haired princess, means that we are perfectly happy to have there then be introduced a talking frog, a flying carpet, an evil stepmother. But if she falls in love with an accountant named Sam Cohen, something is wrong, right? Words create conventions, and conventions not only enrich but constrain meaning. And so we use words to bring whole hosts of other meanings not explicitly said into our exchange of language. Words also have an enormous flexibility. I was taking a bus from LaGuardia to my grandparents' home in Howard Beach in Queens, New York. The bus was going down a small side street. 2 delivery trucks were parked while the delivery men were doing their work in a kind of catty corner, offset manner, so that cars could drive through, but of course the bus, being too long, couldn't. So we sat there. Finally, one of the delivery men came out with his hand cart. He looked at the bus, he looked at his truck, he threw up the side, he pulled down some more cases, and he went to deliver the stuff. And the bus driver, whom I happened to be sitting next to, said, "Fucking truck drivers, each one is stupider than the other." Well, that's not possible. But we understand it perfectly. That's the thing about language. It creates, out of this combination of ambiguity, flexibility, and convention, it creates fictions. And fictions are absolutely vital to our lives. In America, we have a fiction that anybody can grow up to be president. Clearly, this does not mean what we hear. What we hear is everybody can grow up to be president, and there ain't that many spots. But in addition to that, it's also flat out not true that anybody can grow up to be president. So far, if you don't have the right plumbing, you clearly cannot grow up to be president. You also have to be white. You also have to be Christian. And you also have to be related to somebody else. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, everybody can't grow up to be president, but we say this and we somehow hold on to this, and I believe that this fiction is actually crucial for contributing to America's social stability. We live in the world that we create. We live in these fictions. And if you think that fiction isn't important, I spent about an hour today trying to find the exact figures for you folks, and I was unable to. I spent a nice half hour on the phone with some fellow at the Bureau of Commerce, the Department of Commerce, in the Bureau of Exports. I don't know what the numbers are, but the last time I saw a breakdown that gave the numbers, right after armaments, America's second largest export industry was entertainment. That is, Hollywood movies, music, and so on. Fictions, our second largest export industry. Fictions really do matter. They matter, however, of course, because that's how we make our lives. Words are powerful. Think about the power words that we know. For example, the word hierarchy. It comes from the Greek meaning rule by priests. Priests all have those special languages, and they use those languages in order to mediate between us and something else. Whether the something else may exist or not, they've got the key. Hierarchy, rule by priests. Physicians use Latin because, after all, it's so much more comforting to be told you've got rubella than to figure out you've got plain old German measles, right? If it comes in Latin, it's learned. In fact, teenagers use special language, too, for power purposes. They create slang, in part to reject their parents. You don't understand me. Well, of course I don't understand you. I outgrew being a teenager long ago. And I'm going to prove you don't understand me by using this funny language. There's a wonderful scene in A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess where the 15-year-old protagonist, this violent delinquent, well, delinquent's too mild a word, criminal sociopath, Alex, decides he's in the mood for a little mufki-pufki and goes to a local record store where he sees 2 comely, from his viewpoint, 12-year-old girls. At the age of 60, the idea of feeling lust for a 12-year-old girl, to me, seems just dirty, but to him, apparently, it was a terrific idea, and being an older man, he found he was able to attract them. What is interesting about the passage, though, is that he keeps thinking as he's getting them back to his bedroom, you know, I don't really understand them. There's a whole other slang with this next generation. Just 3 years. We use words for social stratification. Now, I have to tell you a story some of you have heard before, and I thank my friends and family who are here and have heard me boring them with this. When I was a kid trying to learn the language that would let me find my place, we had recently moved to Brooklyn and to an apartment complex that had a playground between the two buildings, and the boys there, I was just about 7, the boys there taught me new words. Good words. Bad words, power words. So I waited until I could screw up my 7-year-old courage, and one night at dinner, after I finished what my mother had given me, okay, there I am. My dad is on my left, my sister, 5 years my junior, across the table, and my mother over there. I looked at her and I said, "Give me some more fucking meat." And my mother said, "What did you say?" And I said, "Give me some more fucking meat." And she said, "The word is fucking. I never want to hear you drop your G's again." And she was all of 27 years old herself, but my God, what she taught me about language then. I thought I had power words, you know, and of course that's one of the reasons that I don't have a particularly pronounced New York accent, and I also realized that I wasn't going to be able to pull anything over on my mother. It changed the way I saw things. As Marshall McLuhan says in Understanding Media, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. Words change the way we look at things. This is a diagram I pulled from Wolfgang Kohler's primer on Gestalt psychology. And some people may look at this and see just 4 crossed lines. But others may look at it and see a propeller. And yet others may look at it and see a Maltese cross. How many of you see a propeller? How many of you see a Maltese cross? How many of you see neither? Okie doke. Now then, the white segments form a propeller. If you can see that, let me know. Great. The black segments form a Maltese cross. If you let me know. Excellent. Good. Now then, please see the propeller. Please see the Maltese cross. It's amazing. You wouldn't have seen it if you hadn't believed it. And we use words in order to structure our belief. The so-called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis tells us that we can only see the things we have words for, and we only have words for the things we see. I think it's called a hypothesis because clearly that's not 100% true, otherwise we'd never invent anything new, but the old proverbial notion that Eskimos have 14 words for snow, and native Yiddish speakers have 2 words for fish, and many, many words for poverty, you know, it's just a reminder, of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. In fact, language really does structure things. In English, we have, as I've mentioned in some classes, in English we have 4 basic temperatures. That is, things can be hot, warm, cool, or cold, and anything that can be spoken of in terms of temperature, whether literally or metaphorically, can be spoken of in those terms. I have a warm feeling about that person. I am feeling a little cool about that idea. The food is cool. The weather is cool, and so on. If you speak a Romance language, one of the languages that descends from the Latin, the language of the city of Rome, French, Spanish, Italian, Romansh, Romani, and so on, Portuguese, you'll find that there are only 2 basic temperatures. If you want to say that the weather is warm, you say it's a little hot. If you want to say that the weather is cool, you say it's a little cold. Now, they do have some other words. For example, in French, you can say that the water is tiède, meaning that it's warm. But if you said of your relationship with someone that it was tiède, it would actually mean what we mean when we say it's cool. It would mean that you aren't really feeling vigorously engaged with that person. You can't find temperature words that divvy up the world in Romance languages in 4 segments, only in 2. Language shapes culture. I really don't believe, from my experience, we lived in Spain for a year, a very great opportunity. My experience of having lived with and known many Spaniards, I don't think that they don't feel the same temperatures we do. I mean, does a Spaniard not bleed when you prick him? Anyway, right? But their language is different, and they say different things. You know, I'm an English speaker, so I drop my keys. But me escapo las llaves, if you happen to be Spanish, right? Your keys escaped you, right? I'm taking no responsibility for them keys, right? When I came back from Spain, I got myself a language partner, a guy named Jorge from Valencia, and we spent a very lovely hour or 2 every Friday afternoon helping each other. I was trying to help him speak better English. He was trying to help me at least maintain my somewhat, at that point, passable Spanish. And one day, as we were speaking, he said, Roma no se hizo en 2 días. Rome wasn't built in 2 days. I cracked up. He said, why are you laughing? I said, because you just made a joke. He said, what do you mean I made a joke? I said, well, you said, didn't you, Roma no se hizo en 2 días? And he said, well, yes. I said, well, you know, they say Rome wasn't built in a day. He said, really? I said, yes. In French, they say, Rome n'est pas construit en un jour. He said, well, where I come from, in mi país, se dice, Roma no se hizo en 2 días. Okay, it's the land of mañana. I get it. I get it. They're cracked up. And I said, why are you laughing? He said, because you said Roma no se hizo en 2 días. I said, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? He said, sí, porque en mi país se dice Roma no se hizo en 3 días. Okay, now, it's just a saying, folks, but you know, so is anybody can grow up to be president. It is, in fact, the way we structure our worlds. Now, we can find the way things work by putting words together. At his tea party, the Mad Hatter asks Alice, why is a raven like a writing desk? Honestly, I believe, on the basis of having read Lewis Carroll's diaries, that he really was motivated primarily by the alliteration. Why was a raven like a writing desk? He claimed always that he never had an answer in mind, but his readers wanted an answer, so they inquired, and he made up several, but he always said that his favorite was, of the ones he made up, hundreds are now known, by the way, he said his favorite was because Poe wrote on both. Okay. Why is a raven like a writing desk? Because Poe wrote on both. I think that there probably are not any 2 words that cannot be related. And I'd like to try. So will somebody please offer us any word? Cadillac. Where'd that come from? Max. Okay, Cadillac. Will somebody please offer us any other word? Dish towel. Cadillac, dish towel. Interesting, they have the same scansion, the same number of syllables, same number of vowels. And if you are trying to get a woman into bed, you'd best be able to know your way with both of them. Okay, can we try any? Well, you want to be good around the house, and you want to have a nice car to drive, right? Let's try another 2. Anybody? Cranberry. Who said that? Okay, cranberry, John. Anybody else? Discombobulated. Cranberry and discombobulated. Okay. As it says in the math books, Carl, the solution is left as an exercise to the reader. Seriously. Cranberry and discombobulated. Can anybody think of a context in which they could be related? One often discombobulates cranberries to eat them. Okay, so now we get a new concept of what discombobulation means. The thing is, when you take 2 words and you try to make a context, you try to relate them. Thank you, I'll pay you later. When you try to relate them, what happens is you imagine a new context. The creation of words, the association of words, gets us in our own minds to create another context within which that relationship functions. So we make worlds, we make fiction, in fact. Any 2 words, I think, can be related. For instance, man and moon. All right? How many of you, by the way, actually see the man and the moon when you look up? Okay? A healthy minority. Okay? But we all know the expression, the man in the moon. This particular man in the moon is Georges Méliès, an early 20th century very important filmmaker. And in fact, that is him sticking his face out from behind a pie plate full of whipped cream. He is being hit in the eye by the ballistic missile that he very, very loosely adapts from Jules Verne's Voyage to the Moon. Now, people might say, well, you see the man on the moon because there's something natural about human faces. Babies attend to human faces. And so we look up and we see what is essentially shapeless, and we make it into the moon, the way Carl makes cranberries into cranberry sauce by discombobulation. And that would be true if, in fact, everywhere a healthy minority saw the man in the moon. But in fact, in East Asia, a healthy minority sees the rabbit in the moon. How many of you guys see the rabbit in the moon? We've got about 5, okay? For those of you who don't, there's the rabbit. You see its ears flopping over its back as it's in mid-leap. In fact, I'm told that the vast majority of native Chinese in China will see the rabbit in the moon, and I have had students from China ask me, how can you see the man in the moon? Well, interesting problem. Language makes culture. So I decided to relate 2 words and find out about the golden apple. Since in the modern world, the main source of information is the World Wide Web, I Googled golden apple, and I got 1.16 million hits right off the bat. The very first one was the Golden Apple Foundation, which turns out to be an institution in the state of Illinois honoring excellence in teaching from kindergarten through the 12th grade. The second hit was Golden Apple Comics in Los Angeles. The third hit was London Golden Apple Escorts Service. The ultimate temptation. And I thought, time to refine my search. So I put Golden Apple in quotation marks, and then I put a plus education after it, and still got 255,000 hits. In other words, over a quarter of the hits for Golden Apple actually had to do with, I didn't actually look at all of them, right? But I looked at, randomly for the first 1,000 or so. They all had to do with honoring excellence in teaching in cities, counties, school systems, universities, states. And the question immediately arises, how is it spontaneously and independently so many people use the same metaphor for the same thing? And the answer clearly has to be that these words don't simply have the meaning of a piece of fruit and a kind of metal. They have other associations. They live in a web. They change their meanings, their ambiguous meanings, in flexible ways by conventions that we understand, mediating and creating our culture, which is to say the world we live in. So I wanted to find out more about Apple. For those of you who don't know it, if you trace languages backwards, eventually, if you start with a language like English, you get all the way back to Indo-European. That's the language that branches out and includes Sanskrit and Hindi, and German and Frisian and English and French and so on, not Hungarian or Welsh, not Japanese, not Hebrew, but a whole lot of languages. And apple, it turns out, comes from the Indo-European abel. And as far as I can tell, and I'm only telling by looking this stuff up, I am not an expert in this, it is unknown whether abel originally meant a specific fruit or a generic fruit. It was just abel. So, in fact, in the Bible, we have the fruit of the tree of knowledge, but we all think of it as an apple. Right? But it doesn't say apple there, although apple has this interesting, deep, old meaning. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. We all know that. Doctor comes from a Latin word meaning teacher. So maybe the reason it's an apple a day rather than, say, a glass of prune juice a day, which is maybe not for the same age student, keeps the doctor away, is because that apple a day represents the acquisition of knowledge. It's not just the acquisition of fiber, right? An apple a day keeps the doctor away actually somehow connects with that fruit of knowledge. Milton writes, "The fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe." You notice in that line, the fruit of that forbidden tree, it doesn't say anything about apples. In fact, in Paradise Lost, which is a book-length poem, Milton uses the word apple only twice. And yet, the Oxford English Dictionary, in defining apple, uses that line that I just quoted from Paradise Lost as one of its exemplary quotes. So intimate is our association of apple with the fall and with knowledge. In fact, the King James Version of the Bible says it doesn't use apple at all until we get to Deuteronomy 32:10 in the so-called Song of Moses, where it says, he, meaning God, found him, meaning Jacob, standing metonymically for all of the Hebrews, he found him in a desert land and in the waste, howling wilderness. He led him about, he instructed him, he kept him as the apple of his eye. Apple of his eye. Well, what does that mean? According to the Jewish Publication Society edition of Tanakh, translated into English, Tanakh being the Jewish scriptures, this actually says the pupil of his eye. Pupil is a word that has all kinds of interesting connections that I won't go into right now. Hendrickson, in his Dictionary of Encyclopedia of Word and Phrase Origins, says, though, that literally the Hebrew means the little man in the eye. And that may, in fact, have to do with the etymology of pupil, which is cognate with puer in Latin, a child, something that can grow and shrink, something that can change size, like the pupil of your eye. But that pupil of your eye, the little man in the eye, is, in fact, I think, God's image in the eye of Jacob. He kept him as the apple of his eye. We are created in the image of God. That apple gives us a kind of special knowledge. The Old Testament is consistent in this. Of course, one bad apple spoils the barrel. It turns out, according to the OED, that saying goes back at least until the 14th century. Why do we say one bad apple instead of one bad cucumber? Because we're worried about that certain kind of spoilage that brought death into the world, original sin. Knowledge goes with these things. Johnny Appleseed is a good American fiction, but it turns out this good American fiction had a good, real man behind it. John Chapman was a nurseryman. He went around planting trees. It turns out that in the Northwest Territories, of which Michigan was once a part, if you wanted to be a homesteader, you needed to plant 50 apple trees within the first year in order to be able to keep the rights to your territory. And so he had apple tree farms and sold seedlings to people wanting to settle. He went around, and as new areas opened up for settlement, he went ahead of them, started the seedling farms, and helped these people to settle down, planting the apples wherever he went, bringing knowledge, and not just any knowledge. He was, in fact, never married, but was a missionary, and led services out where there were no other pastors or reverends available. He's buried now in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Not all such apple activities are good ones. We say, for example, that something annoying will happen as sure as God made little green apples. Well, that green has something to do with jealousy, I'm sure, but it also has to do with the fact that green grows up and the apple stops being green and eventually becomes lustrous of one color or another, unless, of course, it's a Granny Smith, in which case the sour, never mind. I actually like Granny Smiths, and I won't criticize her. If you eat an apple and you're about to have original sin, but, it doesn't quite, it gets stuck. That's why it's called an Adam's apple. We're all marked with that piece of apple that's still stuck in our, well, the men are, right? The women don't have the Adam's apple. And I know what happened to the women's Adam's apple. You've all read Snow White. In Snow White, remember, her jealous stepmother brings her the poisoned apple. And she foolishly eats the apple, thinking it will be good for her, but instead it brings death. But she doesn't swallow it all the way. It gets stuck in her throat. The dwarves, whose values I don't think I entirely share, instead of burying her, put her in a glass coffin, keep her on display in the woods. That's what I would do. And Prince Charming comes by, takes one look at this sexy-looking corpse, and thinks, man, I need this. So he hooks up the glass coffin to the back of his horse on a sledge and starts away. And as soon as the coffin starts bumping, out comes the little bit of apple. And she wakes up, original sin is gone, and she's all ready to be the perfect consort for the king-to-be. They kiss, they make up, and as they say, the rest is fiction. The Latin word malus, which means M-A-L-U-S, which means apple tree, became associated with the Latin M-A-L-U-S, which means evil in the Middle Ages. But clearly this idea of the apple being both knowledge and temptation and sin goes way, way, way back. It must have been there even before the writing of the Bible, or it would not have been distributed so beautifully through it. For good or bad, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Isn't that amazing? I mean, we're talking about the ancient Middle East. Why don't they say the date or the fig doesn't fall far from the tree? It's the apple. It's the apple. There's something about that crispness, something about the size of it, there's something about it containing its own seeds and reproducing. Of course, if you have false knowledge, like you flatter somebody and you don't really mean it, but they can tell, that's just applesauce, they say. But if you do things exactly right, if you are righteous, for example, in your homemaking, and you make your apple pies perfectly, according to Hendrickson, that's where we get the expression apple pie order. Apples are everywhere. So let's associate that word with its enormous web of meanings with golden. Gold comes from the Indo-European gel, and the OED says simply it's the most precious metal. I don't think they revise it when platinum, in the markets. It just says most precious metal. It comes from the Indo-European gel, so for you people who give Hanukkah gelt, that's what it comes from. Things are gilded, right? And it also, of course, means gold, but the G becomes a Y, the way garden and yard are associated, and the gel also becomes yellow. So that particular symbol, that visual symbol, that hard, clear metal is the most precious thing. We can hold on to that, but we shouldn't do it thoughtlessly, because all that glitters is not platinum, it's not gold. So you put these two things together, a gold and the apple, and what do you get? You get a golden apple. And there are a lot of golden apples already, long before there were those 255,000 hits on the web. For example, Eris, the Greek goddess of discord, put a golden apple down at a particular wedding feast and said, that between Thetis and Peleus, and said, judge among Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena, I want to know which is the most beautiful. Paris picked Aphrodite, and next thing you know, Trojan War. Okay? The apple of discord was itself a golden apple. Words work in context. They have these webs of meaning. I would call them sort of springy webs. They're not held rigid. We can do things with them, but we know what those webs are. Allusion, for example, makes us understand new things about old ideas. My title, Cobwebs and Cobwebs and Words, oh my, I hope was a clear allusion to another line that you know, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Now, The Wizard of Oz is, after all, a story about imagination. And near the end, you remember that the lion who needed courage was presented with a symbol of courage, a plastic heart, and the Tin Man was, with a medal. The Tin Man wanted a heart, and he was given a plastic heart, and the straw man who needed a brain was given, naturally, a diploma. And each of these three objects was conveyed with words that created a little story, gave a fiction, made those words have meanings. Those meanings were embodied in the symbols, and those three individuals felt and therefore acted different. So when the Wizard of Oz decides he's going to take Dorothy back to Kansas in his balloon, he knows that Oz is now in good hands. The transformation has been made by the words. They wouldn't have seen it if they hadn't believed it. And he got them to believe it. But Dorothy, whose name means gift of God, was not so easily fooled. And she says, I think you are a very bad man. Oh no, my dear, the wizard replies, I'm really a very good man, but I'm a very bad wizard, I must admit. What's good or bad depends on how you look at things. In the Pig and Pepper chapter in Alice in Wonderland, Alice is handed a quite ugly-looking baby while a cook is stirring dinner, and the baby continues to change until eventually it becomes what you see there. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have made a dreadfully ugly child. But it makes rather a handsome pig, I think. It's wonderful how changing the frame, which words alone are often adequate to do, will make us see things differently. Is abortion choice, or is abortion murder? Picking the right word makes all the difference in the world. This is a segment of Orwell's manuscript for 1984. And these are three of his famous slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Boulder dash every one of them. We reject them out of hand. Except as we think about them, they turn out to have some kind of truth. We get to create a new context. We can discombobulate the cranberries and do what Karl Marx did and say, you know, if a man is a slave wholly owned by another man, that owner has a stake in keeping him healthy, in housing him in ill weather, in making sure that he recovers from illness. But if, in fact, that slave is free to sell his labor, then the man who employs him, as long as there's a ready supply of labor, has no incentive whatsoever to raise the wages high enough so that that worker can, in fact, clothe himself, keep himself healthy, and keep himself fed. So what happens, of course, is that Marx claims in such a situation we have wage slavery. Freedom is a worse slavery than slavery, Marx would argue, and he wasn't playing Orwellian satiric games. The same can be done with war is peace and ignorance is strength. Indeed, only people who don't know that something is impossible are likely to persist at it long enough to make it possible. In that sense, ignorance is strength. That's, I think, one of the reasons that Orwell's obviously wrong statements are so compelling to us. Inside somewhere, we realize that if we rewrap the web of meaning around them, they will, in fact, be meaningful. We don't want them to be meaningful. We want to get rid of them. On the World Wide Web, it seems like everything connects with everything. Sometimes it seems like when you start to do any research these days, every key on your keyboard has a W on it. And the question that arises is whether or not this web, in fact, is a cobweb. You know, up until 1992, when the first multimedia browser became available, if you ask someone, what do you think of when I say web, they would have said cobweb. That would have been the immediate association. But now, of course, the immediate association with web is the World Wide Web, and the question is, what is it doing with our heads? Well, I think that the world is part of it. Here is a sonnet I could not resist sharing with you, since this is my ideal last lecture. It's a sonnet that I love enormously. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. Have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. Wordsworth isn't saying there's a problem with the dirt. The world is full of getting and spending. We are so embroiled in this world of ours that even the spiritual inheritance we have that would allow me to see something greater, I would trade away, if only that would give me the clear sight of nature that the ancients had. I have lost the world because of the world. World comes from the Old English where ald. The ald means an age, as in auld lang syne, the age long since. Where means man, as in werewolf. Werald is the age of man. The world that is too much with us is not terra firma. The world that is too much with us is the world we all create. We do that by our actions, of course, but we also do it by our words. That's the world of the World Wide Web. We know what wide means, of course. In this case, it's everywhere. And what about web? Well, as I said, web would once upon a time have meant cobweb. It comes from an Indo-European word, web, and sometimes webs, which gives us web, and it gives us weave, and if you're Italian, it gives us vespa, and if you're English, it gives us wasp. It means things going together. It's interesting, the Latin synonym is texere, which gives us textile, as well as texture, and comes from the Greek techne, which gives us technology, how we get things done, and tela, which of course is fabric, cloth in Spanish, and subtle. Web has something to do with getting things together and making something of them. The cob, by the way, comes from Old English copa, which comes from the Indo-European go, which is a hollow or a thing that fills the hollow, and you see the abdomen on the spider. That's why it's a cob web. We've got to get rid of those cobwebs that are cluttering up our minds. The attic of our mind, Gaston Bachelard's The Poetics of Space, talks about how the attic represents the mind, the basement represents lower parts. Not a place one would want to have cobwebs. We need to get rid of the cobwebs in our minds, and yet, sometimes cobwebs are themselves beautiful, and we need to pause to look at them. In fact, when I think of cobwebs altogether, I realize that they are, in one sense, nature, something that we in the world, in the age of man, create ourselves with fences. They divide, they include things, they exclude things, they define. The web not only creates a set of relationships, it in a way creates the world. But that world includes things that we might not have planned on. The spider needs the web to catch its food, but other things like the fallen leaves will join as well, the unexpected things. Understanding the web makes us understand better. Frankenstein, a story that you all know. If you've only seen the movie, you know that Dr. Frankenstein or Baron Frankenstein creates a monster by reanimating charnel waste. In fact, of course, if you read the book, you'll realize that it's a crazed undergraduate named Victor with no advanced degrees of any sort, not even a bachelor's degree. He may have been general studies, I'm not sure. Anyway, you can see in this poster for the movie how the spirit broods over the actions of Victor and how this leads to the death of Victor's betrothed, Elizabeth. If you read the novel, you will find this section, which is itself less than a page, and in it you will find all of the key terms used around the monster. He's never given a name. I expected this reception said the demon, from the Greek daimon, that is the presiding spirit from Victor's mind. That's what this is. It's the projection of Victor's mind. All men, the monster says, hate the wretched, from an Old English word meaning an exile, someone pushed aside. He's miserable, worthy of pity. He is a creature, a made thing, abhorred monster, he says. Monster has a disputed etymology. It's either from the Latin monere, to warn, or mostrare, to show. Either way, monstrum means something that we look at to realize that there is something to fear. Fiend, an English word, Old English word, meaning enemy. Wretched devil, devil from diabolos in Greek. Dia, a cross, bolus, a ball, like a cannon shot. The thing shot across the bow, the great impediment. Diabolos becomes diavolo, if you like Italian food, and becomes devil. Wretched devil. We are enemies. Those Spanish speakers among us know that the opposite of amigo is enemigo. That's where the word comes from. Those terms, demon, wretch, miserable creature, monster, fiend, devil, enemy, those words define the center of this novel. It's a relationship between the creator, which I've underlined that word here, and the creature. There is no community between them, and therefore one must fall. And that brings us back to the apple. We can understand the novel like that if we understand the web of words. I think that web of words moves us even if we don't know them consciously. That's one of the reasons that that novel has become so widely disseminated in our concepts, whether or not we read it. We know more than we can tell, Michael Polanyi says in The Tacit Dimension, a brilliant insight. And of all of the examples he gives, the one that means the most to me is one in which he talks about a blind person using a cane to navigate a street. You ask the person, what are you doing with the cane? And he will tell you, I am feeling my way around the world, which of course is false. He can't possibly feel the pavement. All he can feel is the end of the cane in his hand. But Polanyi says that when we focus our consciousness distally, everything proximal to that point of focus becomes tacit. Of course we know it. You could not feel the ground without feeling the end of that cane, but you don't feel that you're feeling the cane. You feel that you're feeling the ground. And I think the same thing works with words. We don't realize all that we get in the web of words. We only realize what we realize, but it's all there. Roman Jakobson gave a very famous analysis of how this works. I don't want to take the time to go through it all, but you can see that these 6 constitutive factors of speech make a lot of sense. When I say to somebody, "Hi, how are you?" I'm not only asking a question, I'm also saying, "I like you," and I'm also saying, "Pay attention to me," and so on. All of these different messages are conveyed all at once, but we focus on only one consciously, and all the others are tacit. But that tacit information is there. We learn from words. So, I got to a point in my life where I knew I needed to do some kind of learning that was not in the books, and it was not in what I was getting from my students, and it was not what I was getting, in fact, from anybody. I was not feeling good. I thought I was doing the right things. I mean, I was advancing in my career. I had a wonderful wife. I had lovely children, and yet I wasn't feeling good. And this came to a head for me one day, this tangle I was living in, when I got a call from the assistant to the then president of the university. That was Harold Shapiro, and that is, Harold was the president, not the assistant. And I was asked, would I give a speech to a particularly august group of alumni, wonderful people who had given time and money and advice to the university, a special high group of really very important alumni. And my reaction, as a young associate professor, my reaction was anger. I knotted up inside. And I said, "Please let me think about that. I'll get back to you." And then I spent quite a while thinking about that. And I discovered something that some of you maybe knew your whole lives, something that I now know very well, but something I didn't know then. But I discovered it then, and it made an enormous difference to me. I realized that the reason I felt anger was because that request was going through my ego. If I had just been able to say, "Great, I'll do it," and therefore tolerate saying to someone else, whose task I would now have to give up or reschedule, "I'm sorry, but I'll have to change what I promised you," if I could have just done that, it would have been fine. Or if I could turn to this message from an authority figure, I guess I hope to please, and say, "No, I'm sorry, I don't have the time," and accept not pleasing that authority figure, it would have been fine. I was called and given a lovely opportunity, and the result was anger. I was hurting myself because every thought I had about this went through my ego. I thought about it for a long time, and I decided that I needed a slogan. I needed words that would make me be able to think of a better way to deal with these things. And the words that I made for me, for better or worse, were "be direct." Don't let it get through your ego. And my God, I can't tell you over the course of years how many times life has been easier because I just let my ego out of things and dealt directly with what someone presented to me. It's amazing. You don't get into fights anymore. It's wonderful. Well, there came a time in my life, not too far after that, when I decided, maybe I just need to be better altogether. And I started taking notes about all the things I needed to keep in mind in order to make myself be a better person. The damn list got to be so many pages long that it was clear I was never going to be able to remember them. Eventually, I was able to boil them down to what I call my 7 slogans, and "be direct" is one of them. So I did. I boiled them down to my 7 slogans. And I put them into an acronym so that I'd have one word so that I'd be able to remember it. And the word I want to give you tonight is that word from my title. If this is my last lecture, I don't think teaching you about Frankenstein is really the point. If I've got something that I can really give to the world, maybe the thing I can give is that word, which is a little funny, and it's cobwebs. The first is choose goals. Maybe that sounds simple, and for many of you, maybe it is. But for me, it was not. I suddenly realized at a point in my life that I was pursuing goals that my parents had somehow put on me and I had accepted without ever really thinking them through. And you know what? That's the kind of thing that keeps happening again and again and again in life, where someone says, hey, do you want to do so-and-so? And you don't want to say no, so you wind up doing so-and-so, and then you wind up resenting it. You know what? Choose goals. Don't let them just happen. Choose them. Stop and think about them. Think about the short-term goals, the middle-term goals, the long-term goals. You know, I would like to have this be the case, supposing that I don't die tomorrow. I'd like to have this be the case 10 years from now. And that means that tomorrow I should be doing this. But on the other hand, sometimes you can eat the fried food. Choose goals. Use time. I mean, think of it. You would use your strength. You would use your money. People come to me sometimes and say, listen, I have this manuscript. I'd love it if you'd read it. I'll bet you would. But is that how I want to use my time? I have only so much of it. I don't know how much there is, but I have only so much of it. And anything I use my time for is something else I can't use my time for. So choosing goals also means choosing how I use any given moment. And it's amazing how once this idea became inculcated in me, I was able to much more rapidly respond to requests. You know, well, yes, I'll do that, or no, I won't do that, or I know how much time it takes. Value people. I had a friend, he's now retired and moved away, who was a great conversationalist, and we got together for lunch almost every week, and he always had something wonderful to talk about right off the bat. We didn't have to say within, how have you been this week? I mean, he just had something to talk about. It was terrific. I was out of town one week and came back, and I'd forgotten to call him, and he said, oh, doesn't matter, you didn't call me, I assumed you weren't coming over for lunch. And then I started to realize he never called me to come for lunch. My wife and I had him to our house with his wife. He never called us to come to his house. And I started getting angry. I mean, you act like you're my friend. You love having those lunchtime conversations with me, but how come you never reciprocate, goddammit? And then I had an insight. Instead of thinking, here is my friend who is failing me, why don't I just think, here is my friend whom I value for the lunches and the conversation, and not make any demands of him that he cannot fulfill, and enjoy the ones that, in fact, he gladly fulfills. And the friendship was nothing but a joy to me after that. Was it the most complete possible friendship? No. So what? No friendship can do everything, much as I love my wife. Value people, which means let go of devaluing them and do it consciously. Work zestfully. At least these are the things I tell myself. Right? I mean, we all have work to do, but most of us, especially the people in this room, are working at things they have chosen to work at. I remember when I was an advisor, students would come to me who were chem majors and say, God, I hate my courses. I have no electives. Because chemistry has a long string of required courses and a long string of cognates. And I'd say to them, why did you become a chem major? Well, because I want to learn all of this stuff. And I said, didn't you elect those things? Well, yeah, but you know. I said, yeah, what I know is you want to keep having choice after you've already made the choice. Why don't you just remember, it's your choice. You're living your choice. And work zestfully. It's so much more fun. Enjoy life. You should enjoy life. I thought I would be terribly nervous when I came up here. Instead, I was really, no, actually, I wasn't nervous, but once I saw so many friendly faces, of course I only felt an obligation to try to speak usefully and enjoyably for you, but not nervous. I can enjoy life, but enjoy life has a lot of other meanings for me as well. For example, sometimes, I should tell you, besides being born in New York and being a natural-born Jew, I'm also a native glutton. And when I sit down in front of good food, I know when to stop because there isn't any left. And I have to remind myself, enjoy life. Right now, you want to have that other churro or whatever you're eating, But 15 minutes later, you're going to have this sugar buzz or this ooky, fatty feeling or whatever it is. Just remember that and do the things that will allow you not just to enjoy this minute, but to enjoy all of your life. And keep that in mind. And the last of these, which is the one, in fact, that I have the most trouble with, and those of you who know me most intimately will know it's true, is sleep sufficiently. It really is amazing, folks, but if you remember back a long time ago, the last time you had a good night's sleep, you felt better in the morning, and you smiled more, and people smiled at you. It's kind of magical. It has the power to knit up the raveled sleeve of care, I think someone once said. So these are my 7 slogans. Now the question is, these 7 slogans that together form their own web and come and make my one-word cobwebs, what do you do with it? Well, I don't know what you're going to do with it, but I'll tell you what I do with it. When I was about 19, I read Hermann Hesse's novel Magister Ludi, also known as The Glass Bead Game, and in it there is a character who's quite tense. And he's told, this is like the very first step of yoga breathing, but it gets into the book. He's told, let out your breath and hold it twice as long as it would normally be exhaled before you inhale again. Just let it out and then let it back in. And I think you can even hear my voice starting to get lower as the muscles relax. It happens automatically. And so I decided to use cobwebs as my mantra. And indeed, I do meditate pretty much twice a day. Cov, webs. Cov, webs. And when I find that I'm relaxed, instead of just having the word go through my mind, I let each of the slogans go individually through my mind. Change, goal, choose goals. Use time. And if I do it too fast, if I go from one slogan to another too rapidly, something will itch at the back of my mind. And if I slow down enough to let that concept in its full web of ramifications be available, if there is something bothering me, it will suddenly get caught by the appropriate web. And I will discover what I need to do to make things be better. Honest to God. Cov, webs. I don't know if that's any good to you, but for me, that's my golden apple. And I offer it to you in the hope it will help. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Woo. Thank you so much.
I'm Rabkin. And I would like to read an excerpt from a nomination that embodies what this award stands for. Professor Rabkin has an uncanny ability to fill his lecture hour with useful ideas and theories that oftentimes seem outside the box, but more relevant than standard bread and butter answers. And his class always ends with a zinger, a thought to ponder, a unique manner of interpretation that leaves the student drained from that class, yet ready for the following one. And here's Lauren Schiff. Time you've all been waiting for. Nothing a little closer?
Okay.
On behalf of students honoring outstanding university teaching, it's an absolute pleasure to bestow this incredible and significant Golden Apple Award honor to you, including a $1,000 check. And congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Final
Rabnik, it says Rabnik right there, Carl. Any final thoughts? How many finals do I have? I could not be more grateful. Thank you all very much.